gentlemen, and welcome to your Top Human Rights Organization Review. I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Now today we're going to cover 4 of your top human rights organizations, but we're still going to cover 5 articles. Now first we start with the ICRC, where they train taxi drivers in first aid. Then, Protection International posts an open letter to the President of Indonesia. Next, Human Rights Watch follows the signing of the Safe Schools Declaration. Then, Amnesty International calls for the release of a Yezidi woman. And then we will stay with Amnesty International, and we will end the show letting a disabled refugee tell us about his forced journey. Now to begin, the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, runs first aid courses for taxi drivers in Afghanistan who transport casualties of the fighting to hospitals. Their action is saving lives according to local doctors. Tragic events 8 years ago led a 35-year-old taxi driver from southern Afghanistan to get involved with the ICRC's War Wounded Assistance Program, which trains taxi drivers in first aid. "I was shocked when one of our villagers bled to death right in front of me," he recalled. "That's when I decided to do something to help the wounded, and learning first aid seemed the best place to start." Now, he shared these thoughts during a recent first aid refresher course for 14 taxi drivers involved in the ICRC program. Their work includes evacuating combatants and civilians injured during the fighting to the nearest medical facility. Although not employed by the ICRC, the drivers carry an ICRC facilitation letter to help them negotiate checkpoints and other obstacles. The letter also explains the need for the sick and wounded to have safe and timely access to medical care. "Since I began this work, I've administered first aid to over 800 wounded people before taking them to the hospital," he said. "Sometimes I've transported as many as 8 people per day from southern Afghanistan to Mirwais Regional Hospital in Kandahar, which is 4 hours away. If it's someone involved in the fighting, I never ask who they are or which side they belong to. What matters to me is saving their life, not their background. I remember helping a young woman who had been badly injured in a landmine explosion. I stopped the bleeding and aligned the broken leg. After stabilizing her, then drove her to Mirwas. She would have died on the way if I had not given her first aid before we left." Now, some 60 taxi drivers are taking part in the ICRC's War Wounded Assistance Program, which are running throughout all of southern Afghanistan. And they all have stories just like this one. This is a great opportunity for civilians and particularly taxi drivers to just help out their fellow man and their fellow refugees in this time of war, in this time of violence in Afghanistan. Now next, Protection International posts an open letter to the President of Indonesia, where NGOs stand in solidarity that the government drop the defamation charges against human rights defender Haris Azhar. Now, Mr. Haris Azhar is the executive coordinator at Contras, the Commission for the Disappeared and Victims of Violence. Now, he was reported on August 3rd for a social media post which was written based on the 2014 testimony of executed death row inmate Mr. Freddy Budiman. The writing disclosed how high-ranking officials of Polri, BNN, and TNI have been profiting from drug trafficking in Indonesia. The letter goes on to say, "Dear Sir, we, the Asian Forum for Human Rights and Development, a regional human rights organization, along with our 58 members from 19 countries across Asia, express our dismay at the defamation complaints against a prominent human rights defender, Mr. Haris Azhar, who exposed alleged corruption and collusion between high-level government officials and groups, enforcement officials and groups linked to drug trafficking in Indonesia. Mr. Haris Azhar was reported by the Polri, the National Police, the TNI, the National Military Forces, and the BNN, the National Narcotics Agency, on August 3rd for a social media post. We deeply regret the action taken by the 3 law enforcement institutions. Instead of proactively investigating or initiating fact-finding efforts based on Mr. Azhar's writings, they lodged defamation complaints against him using the notorious Article 27, Paragraph 3 of Law Number 11 of the 2008 on Electronic Information and Transaction Law, which has been repeatedly used to restrict the right to freedom of expression and opinion, This goes entirely against the spirit of the 1945 Constitution of the Republic of Indonesia, which was founded on the values of democracy and human rights. Now, the letter goes on to state that the instigation should be investigated rather than Mr. Azar, but you can find that full letter at the link below in the description. They are using, though, this arrest of Mr. Haris Azar as kind of an opportunity to call the president's attention to law enforcement's constant use of the Electronic Information and Transaction Law. They said the notorious Article 27, paragraph number 3 of Law number 11 of 2008 has been repeatedly used to restrict the right to freedom of expression and opinion. So Mr. Haris Azar was not the first one to be arrested probably for doing something of this sort by posting on social media, but they're using this opportunity to call attention to the president to hopefully get him to do something. Now next, Human Rights Watch follows the signing of the Safe Schools Declaration, as Albania is the 56th country to sign the declaration. Canada is currently being pressured to be the 57th signature. Now, the Safe Schools Declaration protects schools in time of war. The declaration is a political commitment for protection or to protect education in armed conflict. Now, this includes a pledge to respect the guidelines for protecting schools and universities from military use during armed conflict, which safeguards students, teachers, and schools in war. Albania's decision sends a message that schools deserve special protections and that children have a right to education even in wartime. It also could have practical implications because Albanian armed forces participate in the international coalition serving in Afghanistan and Iraq. And for that reason, it's important for Albania to follow this important step by integrating the principles of the pledge of the guidelines into relevant domestic policies and plans. Now, the urgency could not be greater, ladies and gentlemen. Around the world, in places such as Syria, Yemen, and Afghanistan, schools have come under attack. Students and teachers have been maimed and killed by rockets, missiles, barrel bombs, as well as small arms. Over the past decade, government forces and armed groups have used schools and universities as a base or barracks in 26 countries, interrupting classes and making the facility vulnerable to attack. Albania has taken a step to help end that. Other countries should follow to do the same. Now, this is a great declaration to be going around the world right now. I think everybody needs to jump on board because that is an international right. For all children is a right to education. Now, our last two stories come from Amnesty International. First, they call on Iraq and Kurdish authorities to release a Yezidi woman who survived ISIS captivity. The Yezidi woman has been held without trial for nearly 2 years after surviving captivity at the hands of the armed group calling itself Islamic State. Now, she survived being captive by ISIS and is now captive by Iraq and Kurdish authorities. Now, Bassema Darwish, a 34-year-old mother of 3, has been detained by the KRG since October of 2014. She has been accused of complicity with ISIS forces who killed 3 members of the KRG armed forces when they arrived at the house where she was being held captive in Zumar, northwestern Iraq. Yezidi women abducted by ISIS have suffered truly harrowing abuses, including rape and sexual slavery. In the case of Bassema Darwish, liberation from ISIS captivity did not put an end to her mistreatment. Instead of detaining her for nearly 2 years in violation of her rights, the authorities should ensure she receives medical and psychosocial assistance, as well as counseling to help her overcome her ordeal in captivity, said Philip Luther, Middle East and North Africa Director at Amnesty International. Holding her indefinitely without trial or even a proper chance to challenge the lawfulness of her detention is cruel and unlawful. The authorities must either charge her with a recognizable criminal offense or release her immediately. Now, the head of investigations at the Anti-Terrorism Directorate, who met with Amnesty International in August 2016, said that when the KRG forces arrived at the site where Darwish was being held captive, she deceived them by saying the house was empty. He claimed that ISIS fighters hidden inside them hidden inside, then killed 3 members of the KRG force as they entered the house. Now, he argued that Darwish had been radicalized and had deliberately tricked the forces and was responsible for their death. Now, he said that she is being held under the anti-terrorism law and that her case has been referred to court, but a hearing has yet to be scheduled. Relatives of Bassema Darwish told Amnesty International she appeared in court in August at least once, but without a lawyer, and was forced to sign papers written in Kurdish without any understanding of their content. So, seems like a very weird situation and unfortunate situation for this 34-year-old mother. Hopefully, Amnesty International can help get her release. Now, to end the show, we stay with Amnesty International, but we have a video that Amnesty International has posted that tells the story of a few disabled refugees and their journey. Being a refugee is not easy, but being a disabled refugee is even more difficult. Let's take a look.
It was a very difficult journey. For normal people, it's very difficult. But for disabled people, it's like a miracle to cross the borders. When we arrived at the top of the mountains, we took 2 horses, one for me and my sister, disabled sister, and one for our wheelchairs. In Syria, I just worked like a special teacher, teaching children, students, after they came back from the school. When the bombing started, we tried, me and my family, to cross to Turkish side. But every time we tried to go there, the Turkish police shooting us. So we decided to go to Kurdistan of Iraq. We stayed there for 1 year and 4 months. But ISIS come there. So we decided to leave Kurdistan of Iraq too, because no peace there, no safety place.
يعني الرحلة واحد يعني مقبل على موت. نحن ياما سمعنا انه غرقت هذا بلمات بالمي، وكثير يعني صعب. اللي طبيعيين كان صعبة عليهن الرحلة، بقى شلون هدول كثير كانت صعبة، ايش قد ما اقول كما تصوري.
The journey took about 4 hours, and every time I look around, I see babies, children crying inside the boat. It was a very difficult moment.
الكام خيم، وعيشة الخيم يعني الإنسان هلا بهالوقت هذا ما بقى حدا يعيش بالخيام، وصعبة، ونحن ما شفنا خيم بحياتنا. جينا هون العيشة بخيم. الإنسان العادي صعبة كثير عليه العيشة، بقى تعي مرضانين 2 مو 1.
We arrived to Greece at 12th of March, and now it's about more than 4 months here in Greece.
ومرض مو أي مرض، يعني لو فيهم شوي يساعدوا ما في، جسمهم كله حتى العضل المترقي مرضا، يعني ما بيحسنوا يشربوا كاس المي، ما بيحسنوا دموعهم ما بيحسنوا يمسحوها.
The best time of the day for me here when I be in the IMU school. I'm teaching the children. I decide to help the kids here because I found them losing a lot of time by playing and between the trees, and they aren't doing any important things here, just playing without learning. So I decided to teach them English. Never I imagined to stay in Greece, because when I left Kurdistan of Iraq to Turkey, I saw in the YouTube and in the internet that the borders are opening for disabled people and pregnant women and old women and old men. But when we arrived to Chios Island and they told me borders are closed for all cases, just shocked, and I know I will stuck here in Greece. I'd like to go to Germany to be with my father, my sister, and live a normal life, have a family there, have a job. This is my dream.
Well, thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. This was your Top Human Rights Organization review. You can find all the links below in the description. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, or give us a like on Facebook. But I was your host, Bryce Dolan, and thank you for watching.